Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of Boston University Department of Economics, the Institute for Economic Development and the Global Development Policy Center, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2025 Paul Streeten Distinguished Lecture in Global Development Policy. This year, we are honored to have a superb speaker, Professor Michael Greenstone, the Milton Friedman Distinguished Service Professor in Economics at the University of Chicago. Before I begin, I would like to make a note of a few logistics for today's event. This event is hybrid via Zoom. For those joining us in person, you are welcome to join us for reception following the lecture, and the reception will take place just at the back of the room over here. To begin, our distinguished lecturer will give his remarks after my introduction. He will then be joined on stage by Professor Kevin Gallagher, Director of the Global Development Policy Center, for a discussion, and then there will be a Q&A session with the audience. For those of you in the virtual audience, please use the Q&A box located in your Zoom menu to enter your questions alongside your name and affiliation. And for our in-person audience, a member of our events team will bring the microphone to you. Okay, so let me tell you something about the Streeten Lecture. This is an annual lecture that honors the enduring legacy of Professor Paul Streeten, who passed away in 2019, an eminent interdisciplinary scholar, a founding figure in development economics, and a beloved member of the Boston University community. His pioneering ideas on basic needs, human development, and the role of policy in shaping equitable growth continue to influence the field today. From his early work at the Institute for Development Studies in Sussex to his leadership at Oxford's Queen Elizabeth House and his contributions to the World Bank and the United Nations, Paul Streeten dedicated his career to advancing research and research that matters, research that informs policy and policy that improves lives. At Boston University, he attracted generations of students and scholars committed to bridging the gap between economic theory and real-world challenges. That tradition lives on in the work of our three co-sponsors today and in the spirit of this lecture series, which celebrates scholarship that is both rigorous and policy relevant. We have been fortunate to host illustrious speakers over the years for the Paul Streeten Distinguished Lecture in Global Development Policy, beginning in 2018 with our inaugural lecturer, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. In subsequent years, we have welcomed leading global voices such as Joseph Stiglitz, Anne Harrison, Danny Roderick, Eswar Prasad, and most recently Rohini Pandey in 2024. And each has brought rigorous scholarship and policy insight to the most pressing challenges in global development and economic governance. This lecture is made possible through a gift from a BU alum and is co-hosted by three institutions that are deeply committed to advancing knowledge for the public good: the Department of Economics, the Institute for Economic Development, and the Global Development Policy Center, which is an interdisciplinary research center working to advance policy-oriented research for financial stability, human well-being, and environmental sustainability. Through its initiatives, such as the Task Force on Climate Development and International Financial Architecture, the GDP Center brings together researchers and policymakers to advance a development-centered approach to climate change at the IMF. So thank you to all who have made this lecture possible. Okay, and so now it is my honor to introduce today's speaker, Professor Michael Greenstone, the Milton Friedman Distinguished Service Professor in Economics at the University of Chicago, where he also serves as the director of the Energy Policy Institute and the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth. Professor Greenstone's research has shaped how governments and international organizations understand and respond to the economic impacts of environmental change. His work has directly influenced major policy decisions, from the US government's social cost of carbon to China's war on pollution initiative. So to give an example of some of the high-quality academic research that translates into policy engagement, let me mention his recent work on pollution control in the state of Gujarat, India, through the establishment of an emissions trading market. And the establishment of this market led to a reduction in emissions by 20 to 30% and reduced abatement costs by 11%. The analysis of this market resulted in an academic article, Can Pollution Market Work Markets Work in Developing Countries, recently published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, one of the leading journals in the discipline. And quoting from the article, the combination of pollution reductions and low costs imply that the emissions market has mortality benefits that exceed its cost by at least 25 times. As I said, this is research that informs policy and policy that matters for people's lives. I should also mention that the state of Gujarat was also a finalist for the Earthshot Prize, a global environmental award given to individuals and organizations that develop solutions to climate change and environmental issues. The prize was established by the renowned biologist and broadcaster and personality Sir David Attenborough, together with Prince William. I know that some of you may be in a no kings mood, but I guess that princes are okay. So back to Professor Greenstone. He's renowned for developing the Air Quality Life Index, the AQLI, a powerful tool that translates pollution levels into their impact on life expectancy, and for co-founding the Climate Impact Lab and Climate Vault, innovative efforts that combine data, markets, and policy to drive measurable progress on climate challenges. Earlier in his career, he also served as chief economist for President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, where he brought cutting-edge economic research into the heart of public decision-making. Professor Greenstone's work exemplifies what we aim to celebrate through the Streeten Lecture, research that is both visionary and practical, that transcends academic boundaries, and that dares to propose real solutions to global problems. So please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Greenstone to deliver the 2025 Paul Streeten Distinguished Lecture. The title of the lecture is A Proposal for a Climate Grand Bargain Based on Local Climate Damages. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you for that very generous introduction. And I've been told that I have 3 hours, and so I've prepared 197 slides, and we'll try to go through each one in great detail. Okay, so this is based on some work that I've been doing with Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee that takes some of the work some colleagues of mine and I have been doing on what the impacts of climate change will be and uses them to craft a proposal, or I guess what we're calling a climate grand bargain, to kind of unstuck international climate negotiations, which in my view have, for 3 decades more or less, kind of been failing for the same set of reasons over and over. So we want to have a disruptive solution. So I always think it's useful to start with some facts, particularly around climate, where at least in some circles it can be a little gloomy sometimes. And it's just so we're all level set and talking about the same thing. So fact 1 is that projected CO2, so the full line is CO2 emissions to today, and then there you can see a projection with a confidence interval going forward, are projected to remain high through the end of the century. And it's actually, you could look at it as half full or half empty. Like it looks like we're breaking the back of the upward trend, but it does not look like we're anywhere towards reducing emissions to zero. So that's just, we're going to carry that fact around. The second is, what does that mean for for temperature change? And this is the projected impact on global mean surface temperatures. That is the average temperature on the planet at the end of the century. Of course, as that figure showed, we're going to continue to emit beyond then. But at the end of the century, we're on track for a little bit less than 3 degrees C warming. And you can, again, see there's a confidence interval around that due to the many uncertainties inherent in climate change. But if you wanted some good news, this is a major improvement relative to what we thought was going to happen just a decade ago. And so the red range there is the IPCC's projection, 90% confidence interval, of the temperature change that we were headed towards at the end of the century just a decade ago. And what you can see is a lot of the probability mass on 4, 5, 6, 7 is gone. And that is enormous benefit for human well-being because, as I will show in several settings here, we have these nonlinear damage functions. And going from 2 to 3 degrees is much less bad than going from 4 to 5. And that's because the damages really start to increase dramatically, quite rapidly, once you get to higher temperature changes. So that's fact 2. Fact 3 is there is the first bars on the left would be the historical share of emissions of OECD and non-OECD countries. The OECD is, I think that's backwards actually. The OECD is responsible for about 57% of emissions historically. Those are in the bank. There's nothing we can do about them. But this figure is correct going forward for the projected emissions. So for the remainder of the century, about 82% of projected emissions are projected to come from the non-OECD countries. So I just want you to stop and digest that for a second. That means, and I'm going to illustrate this more in a second, any plan that you have or anybody has for restraining climate change is going to have to run through emissions reductions in the non-OECD countries. And of course, those are the countries that generally have lower incomes and greater rates of poverty and are going to be less reluctant, or more reluctant, I should say, to buy more expensive low carbon energy. And this next fact is meant to really drive that, what I just said, home, and calling it the climate arithmetic is cruel. And so let's just zoom out to the end of the century. This is projected emissions at the end of the century. The green guy is non-OECD and the blue guy is OECD. And there you can just see that most of the emissions at the end of the century are projected to come from the non-OECD. The horizontal red line is telling you the level of emissions that the planet would have to have if we were on a path to 2 degrees C. And so you can see that that's way above that. Now you kind of knew that already because you know that we're on a path to about 3 degrees. So let's just play a little game. What if, out of the kindness of their heart, the OECD countries decided, you know what, we're willing to incur extra costs for ourselves, so we're just going to cut our emissions to 0. So then you would get the next thing. You're just lopping off the blue. And all I want you to see is any plan, or a plan to get to 2 degrees C, no matter how you dress it up, has at its heart that there's going to have to be an enormous reduction, in this case about 90% reduction in emissions from the non-OECD countries. So I'm not telling you who's going to pay for that or who should pay for that or what's moral or anything like that. This is just arithmetic. And I'm saying that that arithmetic is cruel because these are the very places that currently have lower incomes and have all the miseries of lower incomes attached to it. So that's another fact that I want you to walk around with as we go forward. Fact 5 is my judgment, this is my personal judgment, is that the 3 decades of international climate negotiations are basically a failure. And we could try to unpack that. I'll try to unpack that a little bit in this slide. And I think a lot of us, kind of in some part of our brain, maybe it's because, and I was talking to the graduate students, maybe it's because we have friends who teach at the Kennedy School or something, kind of implicitly think, oh, there's a global social planner and they're going to set a carbon price and they're going to, set some limits on global carbon emissions, and that's kind of our path out of this. But I want to say that's absolutely and completely wrong. There is no climate king. There's nobody who's in charge of setting emissions in India. There's no who also sets emissions in Bangladesh, who also sets emissions in Pakistan, the United States, and the EU. All actions are voluntary and are determined locally. And of course, when I say that, everyone recognizes that's true, but I think we have to kill the idea that there's a climate king lurking out there who's going to emerge and somehow produce some, order a bunch of people to do a bunch of things in a bunch of different countries. So in these climate negotiations where each country is representing their interests as best they understand it, you have that the low and middle income countries have basically been extraordinarily unhappy with the last 3 decades of negotiations. Previous climate finance amounts are incredibly small. They often, like when you dig into it, you can't quite believe it's true, but like the amounts of money which are promised, they're never actually met, but the ones that actually flow through, it's like a super creative accounting system. If I lend you $1 and you have to pay me back tomorrow, that counts as $1 of climate finance. Now, a normal person would not think of that as $1. And the money that does come through comes through with enormous restrictions. I think this kind of payment is unlikely to produce much in the way of reducing emissions. In like any unhappy marriage, the other side is pretty unhappy too. The OECD countries are very reluctant to cut emissions, to cut their own emissions. All the internal politics push them towards, why would we do that if fill in your favorite non-OECD country is going to let it rip on emissions? And as a consequence, they're quite reluctant, and it's politically challenging to provide climate finance. So what I'm going to argue and try and build the case for is that we need a completely new approach, and that approach is feasible. But it's going to start with what I think is a pretty I hope a non-controversial view, is that the principle is that the benefits must exceed the costs for all the participants. No deal is stable if that's not the case. And so the proposal that Esther and Abhijit and I are making is quit all the loose happy talk and get to a pure deal, like a quid pro quo. And on the OECD side, they would agree to pay the low and middle income countries for the damages their emissions are causing, not in the past. Reparations are very challenging, but based on present and future emissions, and that they would do that, and each OECD country could decide to do that on its own. Now that might sound like that's a crazy idea, but what would they get in exchange? They would get that the low and middle income countries would have to institute carbon pricing, and we've proposed graduated carbon pricing for a lower price for low income countries than for upper middle income countries. And what our proposal would reduce carbon emissions by 2050, if fully adopted, by more than 100 billion tons. The low and middle income countries would get to keep their carbon revenue, the revenue from their carbon taxes. And it's an extremely, you only get, there's no side is doing it on their own. They only do it if the other side does it. So at the center of that is how much do the OECD countries owe the non-OECD countries for the damages that we are causing with our emissions today. And so you have to have some sense of that. If you had that argument in the context of need, that conversation would go on forever. And so we're going to try and ground that in what empirical evidence we can. And let me just say that, I'm going to, this, in the interest of time, I can tell we're not going to have enough time I'll do explain the history of doing this, but let me just say that this is coming from some work that I've been co-leading at the Climate Impact Lab that has a couple features that I just want to highlight. The first is we're going to be able to produce estimates of damages not at the continent level, not at the region level, but at 25,000 units around the world. So we'll have highly localized estimates of what damages from additional tons of CO2 will do. These estimates are going to account for adaptation, which of course takes many forms in many different parts of the world, and I will get into this. And I'm going to skip this in the interest of time and get into the meat of how we produce those estimates and then some more details on the proposal. So let's start with, or turn to, what do we know about the damages from climate change? And I'm going to be drawing from my work here with the Climate Impact Lab, which has produced papers published in both economics and science journals. So let me start with what are the damages likely to be at the end of the century based on this work, which I'm going to march you through a little bit of that. I want to say from the start, I'm going to show you two different scenarios. One is in climate wonkaland, they call RCP 4.5. Just think of that as an emissions scenario, and that you should think of as if the planet were on a path to about 2 degrees of warming. And RCP 8.5, or maybe it's 2.4, and RCP 8.5 as if the planet were on a path to about 4 degrees of warming. The truth is going to be somewhere in between the middle. And what I want to do here today is fill in those damages in 5 different categories, 2 of which I'm saying are non-market damages, mortality, and how unpleasant it is to work in outdoor jobs when it's hot. And then some market sectors as well, agricultural yields, energy consumption, and coastal damages. And I'm going to take those 5 sectors, I'm going to add them up, and I'm going to call that the total cost of climate change. It obviously is missing some important categories, and we're trying to produce research to add those categories. But for today, I'm going to call that the total damages from climate change. And so I'm going to try and fill in this red box with you. So let's just take a look at the impacts on mortality. And this draws from some work in a paper that was published a couple years ago in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Okay, to do this, we collected data on, so what we had understood about the impacts of temperatures on mortality previous to this was almost entirely from rich countries in very temperate climates. And so our first task was, wait a minute, most people don't live in those places. Shouldn't we try to find out what the impacts will be where most human beings actually live? And so it's difficult to get vital statistics data around the world, but we were able to get it for 55% of the global population. We matched that with historical weather and climate data. We matched that with projections for what is likely to happen under these different climate scenarios, and then some assumptions on the rate of population growth and economic growth and things like that. Okay, so what comes out of that? I'm going to show a bunch of figures that all have this flavor. And so let me just talk it through. On the vertical axis, we've got annual deaths per 100,000. And on the horizontal axis, we have daily temperatures. And so the exercise that I want you to have in mind is what happens if I swap a day from, let's say, like 15 degrees C to some other temperature, be it a very cold temperature or a very hot temperature. And that's effectively what climate change is going to do. It's going to move days out of the very cold extremes to the higher extremes. And so the response function for that, for people less than age 5, is basically pretty flat. We didn't have granular enough data to do infant, 0 to 1. There is a U relationship in the parts of where we have that, but here it's basically no relationship. For 5 to 64-year-olds, there's basically no relationship. But what comes out of the data is this very sharp U relationship for people over 65, I guess 65 and above. The way you would read that is if you took a day from 15 degrees C and swapped it, in this case, for a day that's 40 degrees C, you would increase the annual death rate by about 6 per 100,000. Okay, and so that's going to be like a key ingredient into understanding what climate change does, or the mortality consequences will be. But what I want I'm going to keep coming back to is the history of climate impacts work has been to talk about, well, global GDP will change by this amount, or some kind of global average. And the problem is nobody actually lives at the global mean, and I find that a very off-putting way. People have a hard time connecting to it. And so what we're going to try to do is, or what we have done, is drive that down to estimates at the local level, local here being defined by these 25,000 regions. You should think of it like a US county or a district in India or China. And to illustrate how heterogeneous that is, I've cherry-picked, admittedly, these two cities, which I think really help make the point. This is the mortality response function in Oslo in 2015, and that's the temperature distribution, daily temperature distribution in Oslo. And you can see, and so the response function just extends over the area where there's support in the data. And you can see in Oslo, cold days are terrible. It kills people. And even though Oslo's rich, that's true. And so you can see if it warms, we'll come to that. We'll take if it warms, that's going to be great for Oslo because they're going to get rid of all those cold deaths. And it doesn't really look like Oslo is going to get hot enough to where the response function starts to turn up. So that's today, Oslo. Let's look at Accra today. Okay, Accra is already a warmer place. You can see it's near the equator, so they actually don't have such a large range in daily temperatures. That's at the bottom there. And that's kind of what their response function looks like. So now, to get climate impacts, now we're going to put these together, and I just want you to see how different it is depending on where you are in the world. If you're in Oslo or Accra, these are very different experiences. But what I also want you to take on board is what determines those differences. And a theme in our work is that you can predict the differences based on income levels in the location and on the long-run climate. And so if you just want a heuristic to keep in your mind on the long-run climate, take Houston and Seattle. Those are basically, in a global sense, the same place in terms of income. If you're from Texas, you might not think that, but it is true. And when a hot day comes to Seattle, which it comes very rarely, the mortality impacts are like 15 times larger than they are in Houston. And now, why is that? Well, that's because in Houston, they've done a zillion things to basically install air conditioning everywhere and protect people. And so it's going to be very important to account for both how income evolves over the remainder of the century and climate evolves over the remainder of the century, and allow for those kinds of adaptations which are present today in the cross-section to emerge over time. And so that's what we try to do. There's my Houston and Seattle one. Okay, and so how do we, in the data, what do we actually see? We see that the effect of a hot day, this is about 50% lower in the highest tercile of income in the world than it is in the bottom tercile of the world, which lends support to income being an important source of adaptation. And you can see that almost all of the extra deaths in the world are occurring from hot temperatures are occurring in the places that are low income. Now, it is also true that there's climate adaptation, and this is this Houston and Seattle point that I was making. So let me show it to you with data, not with storytelling. So if you go to the coldest decile places in the world, that's those red places there, when a hot day comes, that is a 35 degrees C day, what is its mortality impact relative to a 20 degrees C day? You can see it's about 17 extra deaths in the over 65 category per 100,000. Now I'm just going to march down the climate distribution, and so I'm going to show you the 9th coldest place, and the 8th, and the 7th, and the 6th, and the 5th. And this is just telling you that the impacts of hot days in places where they occur all the time are much smaller than the places where they occur very rarely. And for good reasons. People make investments that are not worthwhile to make in places that are generally cold. And so if you added that all up, here's the mortality response to hot days currently. But we're going to have to account for climate changing and income changing. And so if you did that in the case of Oslo and Accra, their response functions would change. And here you can see how the response function for Oslo would get less steep, and the same for Accra. Okay, so when you put it all together, if you were to fail to account for adaptation, you would have that the temperature impacts on mortality would just be enormous at the end of the century, like 200 extra deaths per 100,000 people. But once you allow for adaptation due to income and further adaptation due to climate, that comes down quite a bit. And importantly, when you add in the cost of that adaptation, the climate adaptation, in our estimates, we're going to account for that as well. And that's the black line there. That we're calling that the full mortality risk to climate change. And so it includes the direct effect of the extra deaths, as well as the money that people spend protecting themselves. This is just a map of how different the full mortality risk of climate change at the end of the century will be around the world. You can see that there will be these vast pieces of land that are blue. Nobody lives there to a first approximation. That's called northern Canada and Siberia. And these are places where mortality rates are going to go down by quite a bit. But in that belt around the equator where lots and lots of people live, you're going to see large increases in mortality rates due to climate change. And here I've pulled out some cities just to give you a sense of what the full effects are, with noting their uncertainty. Once I have that, I can monetize it by using something economists like to call the value statistical life. And when you put it all together, the mortality impact, the damages from the mortality, the temperature-related, the climate-induced changes in temperature, their impact on mortality are about, under RCP 8.5, almost $13 trillion per year at the end of the century, and much smaller and there you can see the nonlinearity in warming, much smaller under RCP 4.5. Okay. Now, in the 3-hour version, I would march through all 5 of these sectors. Here, I'm just going to give you a short version of what we do in energy. But I think it really, there's a truth to this, or a revelation to this, that I think at least altered my thinking. When we began working on this, I had in mind that there was this U-shaped relationship between daily temperatures and energy consumption throughout the world. And that was largely informed by my own personal experiences in the U.S. and research in the U.S. And you can see that here. On cold days, there's a lot more consumption of energy, and that's for heating. And on hot days, there's a lot more, and that's surely for cooling. When you go to the global data, there's almost no relationship. People basically consume the same amount of energy no matter what the temperature. And so how could that be? So we had this blind spot, just like we did with mortality. And that blind spot is we hadn't collected data from the whole world, so we didn't really understand what was going on in the whole world. Once you break this out by decile of income, you can see in the richest decile of income in the world, there is this very sharp U relationship, just like we see in the United States. In fact, the United States is in that decile. But once you start to go down the income distribution, here's 987, by 7, that relationship's almost gone. And anything below the top, the bottom 6 deciles of the income, anything in the bottom 6 deciles of the income distribution, there's no relationship. Guys are not wealthy enough to be able to protect themselves through the adaptation of heating and cooling. And so I want you to think about, well, what does that mean? What that means is, yes, there's adaptation, and that's expensive in rich countries to high temperatures. But that's in the name of preventing death and things like that. Here, below the 7th decile, the way people are going to confront climate change is through what you might, in an anodyne way, call direct impacts, which is really just code words for mortality. And they're going to take it because their trade-off of spending on adaptation versus current consumption needs pushes them basically to do that. And so it helps highlight, and so here you can see this is Accra and Oslo again. There is this U relationship in Oslo. Accra is completely unresponsive, its energy consumption, to what the temperature is. And so people there are exposed, basically choosing to expose themselves to mortality risk because that's a better bet than curtailing their consumption in the name of pursuing this form of adaptation. Okay, so we can fill that in. Here's the energy consumption impact. You can fill it in for the other sectors, which I think we'll do in the red box here. And when you add it all up, this is the total damages at the end of the century across these 5 sectors. You might say that they're incomplete. I would agree with you, but they're at least the most comprehensive we've been able to pull together. So far I've been talking about damages at the end of the century. Of course, damages at the end of the century reflect emissions since the Industrial Revolution. And I think the policy choice that we have in front of us is what to do about current emissions. And a very useful concept for that is something called the social cost of carbon. And what the social cost of carbon is, it's the monetized value of the release of an additional ton of CO2. And what we have done in the Climate Impact Lab is show, so that's basically saying what are the total monetary dollar damages from every ton of CO2 that people do, and that you should think of that as the cost of climate emissions, and that can be compared to the benefits. What we have done with the Climate Impact Lab work is geographically resolve that social cost of carbon. So now you can say, well, there's like this many dollars in Pakistan of damage and this many dollars in India from every ton. And just for those of you who are not like climate nerds and wonks, like the average American does about 15 tons of CO2 per year. So whatever number I'm going to show you, you get to multiply that by about the social cost of carbon, and that'll tell you the climate damages that the average American is bequeathing to the whole world. And by geographically resolving it, I can also tell you where those damages are going to occur. All right. So in case those words weren't clear, sometimes pictures are helpful. Here's a picture version of what the social cost of carbon is. Here's a marginal ton going up from burning coal or some other fossil fuel. That's the vertical line there. That's that marginal ton's effect on CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. Thank goodness I collaborate with a climate scientist, because I would have stared at that figure forever, like why does it go down and go back up? Well, there's a very complex relationship between what the oceans are pulling in and then what the oceans are later releasing, and so that's why it has that funny shape. Here's the effect of that extra pulse of CO2 on temperatures. I want you to note that graph goes out to 2,300. So every one of your 15 tons this year, average American, is influencing temperature in 2,300 and actually beyond. But this analysis is only going to go to 2,300. And then this is a stream of damages associated. And that damages, those are net damages. There's some benefits like in Oslo, and then there's some costs in other places. The year-by-year dollars per ton of CO2. And of course, to get the social cost of carbon, you're just going to take the present value of that. And you're going to need a discount rate to do that. Okay, so that's the social cost of carbon. What does it add up to? If you used a income-adjusted VSL, which I think economics would tell us is probably right, that people in richer countries are willing to pay more because they have more to protect a life, then the global social cost of carbon in 2025 from every ton is about $146. If you are my good friends and co-authors, Abhijit and Esther, and you find it morally reprehensible that lives would be valued differently no matter what economics says, and insist on there being a $2 million global VSL, which I don't think they're without merit for believing, but then you would get to $190. Okay, and here's some details on how we got it. That's probably not for today. So how is that $190? I'm going to carry that forward due to my admiration and friendship for both of them and their respect for their views. Let's geographically resolve that $190. Where is it taking place? Remember, each of you responsible for 15 tons as an average American. Probably some people in this room are responsible for more than 15, and some people are probably responsible for less. Here's where it's distributed around the world. You can see that every one of those tons is doing, in this case, like this is like a penny or something like that, cents per 100,000 people. And that's like too hard of a concept, but that's for 25,000 places. So I tried to make it easier by putting the distribution of that. So the top 10% most damaged of the population are bearing like 60% of the total costs of every ton. The next 10% are like 17%. And really all I want you to see is like, it should have been 10, 10, 10, 10 if climate damages were distributed equally. It is not 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. And there's just enormous inequality in what the impacts of climate change are going to mean for people around the planet. If you wanted to break it out to some key regions and countries in the world, the $190, about 100 is going to live in Africa, about 20 in India, about 20 in Pakistan. China has some cold places and some exposed places to kind of balance each other out. Same thing with the US, same thing with the EU, kind of a net zero. If you wanted to put that in a table, which you might, what are the damages globally from the 50 billion tons of CO2 that we do annually, or that we did, in this case in 2022? The 2022 emissions did about $9.5 trillion worth of damages, according to these estimates. How is that distributed? About 96% of it is occurring outside the OECD, and about 4% of it inside the OECD. And you can see a different way to demonstrate that is just by showing that the local social cost of carbon in the OECD is about $6, and in the non-OECD, it's about $184. And so the damages get distributed in that way. Okay, so now you know what the social cost of carbon is according to this research. You know how it's geographically resolved. And so that's the foundation for our climate grand bargain. And so let me try to provide a little more meat on the bones about that. So what the bargain, I guess I should say, potentially offers, since it has not been adopted by anybody at this point, we're just proposing it now, is a compromise between the OECD and the low and middle income countries that has the potential to benefit both. And as I said at the outset, the low and middle income countries would be compensated directly based on the climate damages that the OECD emissions do each year on an annual basis. They can do whatever they want with the money in our proposal, completely unrestricted. And in fact, our aim is not to run it through governments, but to use the advances in mobile money to direct it, most of it, to the people themselves. They only get that money if they institute carbon pricing, and demonstrable economy-wide carbon pricing. Why might the OECD find this appealing? Well, it's true. I don't feel good as the average American that I'm bequeathing roughly $3,000 of damages, 96% to the world, 96% are concentrated in the non-OECD countries. So you might think that there's some moral responsibility or kind of polluter pays principle that you would want to follow. If you're not into morals, then you could just go for a pure self-interest thing. And the self-interest would be, it would be great if global emissions would stop, because surely inside our estimates of social cost of carbon, what we're missing is like international migration flows and other things that the OECD countries might care about. How would this be funded? What we propose is it be funded by closing some international tax loopholes. They would not have to, some of it could come from general revenue, but almost all of it could be funded by closing some loopholes around global corporate taxation and imposing the kind of Zuckman 2% billionaire tax that has been proposed in France. And the OECD offer has 3 pillars. The first is automatic transfers to households, and that would eat up about 70% of the funds, and that would basically be universal basic income of $3 per day in very poor countries. That would be automatically triggered in a parametric way by what the temperature realization is. There's no filing of claims or anything like that. A second part is obviously some of adaptation to climate change is going to require government engagement, and so there would be some community block grants to facilitate that kind of public good style adaptation, and then some crisis financing for governments in the face of disasters. What would this look like? So if we just take the 2022 emissions, the OECD was responsible for about 13 billion tons. What that would do would unlock in some countries, we picked some here to highlight this, very large payments. You can see these 3 countries, the rest of the low and middle income countries. Oh wait, the slides, okay. If we were to break it down, what would the US owe? Here's what the US would owe. Here's what the EU plus UK would owe. And this is what the rest of the OECD would owe. The time pattern of the damages, of the payments would change as OECD's emissions evolved and as the social cost of carbon evolved. I want to put an asterisk next to this. My RAs and I are trying to understand exactly what's going on there in 2060. There's something weird. So I know the other numbers I'm happy to stand by, but this one I'm a little confused about. Okay, so that's the OECD side. What's on the low and middle income country side? They would get basically unrestricted money that is pegged to how large damages are, not to quote unquote need, which is everyone's going to have some different conception of need. They would have to do mitigation in exchange for that. On the plus side of doing expensive mitigation is we just learned almost all the benefits of mitigation reside maybe not in any individual low and middle income country, but does reside in low and middle income countries generally. A lot of these countries have difficulty raising government revenue. They would have a new source of government revenue. And in particular, we would build upon the view that carbon pricing, that there should be common but differentiated responsibilities. The proposal is for a $10 carbon price in low-income countries, $30 in lower middle income, and $50 in upper middle income countries. Economy-wide, it's not a nothing thing, all rising about 5% rising 5% annually in real terms. What would that produce for the world? So the low and middle income countries are on a path to emitting about 500 billion tons of CO2 between now through 2050. There would be about a 25% reduction in that from this carbon pricing program. What would the benefits be for the world in terms of reduced climate damages? You can see it'd be like $29 trillion, very large reduction in climate damages from the reduction in emissions. And the revenues that these guys would get to keep from their carbon pricing, which they could spend however they want. They could spend it on compensating the industries that had to pay it. Would be about 4% of GDP, not a trivial amount of revenue for countries in these worlds, for these countries. Okay, so let me summarize. Our proposal for a climate grand bargain is based on actual estimates of climate damages, not on need, not on what people might want, not on some debate about fairness. It is unanchored to evidence. We asked, what the numbers, the anchoring of numbers is based on the work that I've been doing and others have been doing through the Climate Impact Lab that tries to build up sector by sector estimates of what the damages of climate change will be. If you want a walking around number, the global social cost of carbon is about $190 per ton of CO2. When you geographically resolve that, about $178 of that 190 lives inside low and middle income countries, so it's highly unequal. And if you also want to walk around, we're doing, global GDP is about $100 trillion a year currently. If you wanted to have some kind of green GDP accounting and subtract off the damages that we're giving ourselves, that you'd take off about $9.5 trillion per year, so about 10%. So I think, continue zooming out, like the planet is asking for a solution. My view is that without meaningful compensation, let's call them carrots, the low and middle income countries are not going to find it in their interest to reduce their emissions very much. So a way to get there is to compensate them for that. And using local estimates of social cost of carbon can help inform the damages and unlocks this, the contours of this climate grand bargain. For those of you who like moral responsibility, I would call this an effort to stitch together moral responsibility with self-interest. So it's a big enough boat that both views, or people who believe only one or the other can get on, or people who believe both can get on. And I think importantly, relative to some of the other proposals that are out there, to confront that the non-OECD countries are projected to account for more than 80% of emissions through the remainder of the century, the kind of EU's approach of CBAM, which I think of as like a very stick approach, this is much more of a carrot approach and preserves countries' rights to self-determination for doing things that they judge in their best interest. And finally, I'll just add, we didn't get into this, I'm sure we could unpack it if people are interested. It does not require every country in the world to participate. This self-interest can take the form of some countries choosing to and some countries not choosing to. Okay, so thank you very much.
It's from virtual folks as well. But, and feel free to ask Professor Greenstone questions about this proposal, about the economics behind it. But also remember that we're honoring the legacy of Paul Streeten, and he's an economist that also did rigorous economic research like this, but engaged in the policy world. And if I can just kick it off with one that tries to combine both of those, both of the spirits here, is that sometimes economists are told, or we feel uncomfortable that our job is really just to identify some of the trade-offs, or to tell policymakers what's efficient and what's not, and then that's where we're stopped. But obviously, you've had a whole career where you've been in local communities in the Obama White House, and now you've got this big global proposal for the world. So as an economist, you see this as an important role or responsibility for an economist in today's world, and what kind of advice, especially there's a lot of young economists in the room. I know you spent some time with some of them earlier. What kind of advice do you see? Would you give them to pursue? What are some rules of thumb to pursue such a career path?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think I'm a reluctant academic. I was like love learning. I love understanding the world and trying to improve understanding of the world. But I've lived with reason I was reluctant to become an academic, live with the nightmare, well, maybe this would just be a conversation between me and 9 of my friends. And it's not that I don't want approval from those 9 people, who I also write papers that I admire, but I would feel a little sad if that's what I had entirely devoted my life to. Again, with all due respect to my 9 friends. And so I've been desperate to find a way to ensure that these ideas that we work so hard on producing can be useful in the real world. And I guess what was shocking to me when I went to work in the Obama White House was I assumed super naively that here I've been studying away and teaching at Chicago and MIT and working hard to know something about all these topics. And I kind of thought oh my God, they're going to throw rose petals on my path there, and they're going to be so excited to understand all the things I've learned and it could be useful in the world. And of course, that was horrifically wrong. And actually, in probably my first few weeks there, I think they were desperate for me to leave. What I came to understand, which I'd known intellectually, but to fail at it so miserably in person, was how horrible we are at communicating. We've developed these super technical languages that make for efficient communication between each other, but do not basically keep everyone else out. And maybe in addition, irritate everyone else. And so it was kind of a awakening. I thought I had been on this plan, this path, and then I realized oh my goodness, I have not thought about this path correctly. I have to understand the world as the way that they're seeing it and the way they hear it and the way they understand it. And no, they were not waiting for me to arrive. So.
Great answer. Let's take 2 or 3 at a time, and please introduce yourself so Professor Greenstone can get to know who you are, and you folks can get to know each other. And we're here at BU. I see one hand up, but we're doing students first. So we'll go you in the back there with your hand up, and then we'll get you in the front.
Hi, my name is Namrita. I started as an AP at BU Questrom this year. I study innovation. So I'm wondering, the part of your talk on damages that should be sent over to, say, India, Pakistan, the fact that so much innovation happens in the US, and the US has so many systems, and we'll see how that shapes in the future, but currently is so far ahead in terms of being innovative, how much of those dollars should be kept here in the US, but directed towards innovation targeted at LMICs?
How much money should be spent on innovation? So I actually think there is an enormous, I'm not sure I'm going to get your question exactly right. The climate problem is characterized by 2 market failures. One is that it's free for me to pollute in most parts of the world and cause damage to my neighbors or actually, as I showed, people around the world. That's largely free. A second market failure is that we don't have enough innovation because innovation does not respect a firm's boundaries. Those can be attacked separately with different instruments, I would argue. So the first you'd want to attack with just a pure carbon price, and the second with subsidies for innovation. So there is a more subtle version to your question, which is maybe what you had in mind, is instead of the US sending money for the damages it's causing, would it be right to convert that into R&D dollars that are spent here? And I guess you could make an argument for that. You'd have to take a stand on how every R&D dollar that you spent, how much that's going to reduce future damages in those countries. I don't, that's some unknowns there subject to probably the great research you're doing.
We're gonna move on to more.
So is this on? Is this on?
Yep. Please introduce yourself.
Is it on? Can you hear me? No.
Yeah, we can hear
Okay, David Campbell, professor of physics here at BU. My interest is that I teach Kilochina Honors College class to 7 very bright freshmen. It's called Energy and Society. It's exactly on this. And what I want to ask is whether this presentation has been videotaped, or will it be published so I could simply play it for my class? Because it's exactly what the class is doing the whole time. Will it be available publicly?
Yeah, we every year, if you go to the GDP Center webpage and you just look at the Paul Streeten Distinguished Lectureship, you can watch the videos of every single one.
How soon will it be up?
I don't know, folks. When are we putting it up, Aman?
Sooner the better. Well, what does soon mean? Seriously. I'm serious. When? 5 days?
5 days. Is that okay?
I'll hold you to
Don't-
it. I'll be
you
on
can-
the air. Thank you.
How about in the back corner here? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Had your mic. We'll get you after.
My name is David Demerit. I'm a geographer. I work in Earth and Environment. I'm much more sympathetic to the argument, but I wanted to ask some questions about the damage function. So you got this grand bargain that's driven by the need to break the logjam. Most of the future emissions are going to be in developed countries. Most of the money to mitigate those emissions is located somewhere else. And so you've kind of given us this geographical resolution about where the damages are, and you show that most of the damages are in developing countries, but that's not where the money's going to come from. And so I wanted, that's not where the money to mitigate them. I want to ask a couple of linked questions about how you calculate the damage function without getting too far into the weeds. It looked to me like, but you only had the table up for a second, that most of the damages were mortality damages.
Yeah, that's right.
That's okay. And so I wondered how those were estimated. It looked to me like it was a sort of linear assumption about the relationship between daily mortality and temperature, and we just shift the curve to the right and we'll have more mortality. And then I wanted to raise a second question about how you would account for kind of non-linear tipping points. So, if we collapse the West Antarctic ice sheet, 4 to 5 meters of sea level, and likely a whole bunch of very expensive real estate, Boston, like a sixth of the land area, most of the downtown is reclaimed. All of this would be, well, we're on the second floor, so we might be able to have a sea view. And how you would account for that, and if you did, would you get a different distribution of the damages, and would that change the kind of incentives that are about driving the logjam? Because I'm not sure how, like a bunch of dead people in developing countries, when you have even if we have a calculation of the social cost of capital, now apparently it doesn't have any cost, but there was the view that damages outside the United States don't count. And would a kind of an accounting of the nonlinear damages give a different distribution and thus a little bit more impetus for your grand bargain?
Okay, great series of questions. We're very much trying to capture a nonlinear relationship between temperatures and mortality. And that's, in fact, that's what that U relationship is. And what that reveals is like taking a day and going from 30 to 31 has a much smaller impact on mortality than going from 36 to 37, exactly because it's nonlinear. So I think, you might say quadratic was not flexible enough, and we tried to push the data as hard as we could without losing too much precision. I'm with you, and we've done it. We've gone as far as the data let us go on that. On the second question, I really do want to underscore there's all kinds of things that we're missing. We do have some coastal damages in our estimates, and that's why actually parts of Canada actually have large damages, because those are the coastal parts of Canada. Even though they're going to benefit from the warmer temperatures in the winter on net, they're going to have some parts of Canada will have benefits. But there are totally things outside of our damages. And I could point to several. Certainly, if you think there's going to be international migration, that's outside. If you think a climate-induced international migration. The wildfires is something we're working on. That's currently outside of what we're doing. We haven't, there's not a great way, we can't get a PDF for the tipping points from the climate scientists. I keep asking them. And so we don't have a real way to integrate that except to note, gosh, that's outside of what we're doing. And so I totally agree. There's climate impacts that are outside of what we've done. And if I didn't, I want to state that clearly.
Here in the front.
My name is Hong Yang. I'm with Harvard China Project on energy, economy, and environment. Thank you for the talk. My questions to do with your data and your analysis leading to the proposal. The first one is the first few slides you cite Larson 2025. Can you tell us where the data published, which journal that the published?
It's from the Rhodium Group projections.
Okay.
It's using the Rhodium Group.
All right. So the second question has to do with your analysis. You have both historical climate data and future projections used in the models. Just wonder how those data sets are being used in the models, which way they are used, which portion. The last question related to that is in your damage estimate, you have some negative numbers that, for example, in the energy. So what are the negative numbers represent? They are lower than the present, or how?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, great question. The historical data is used to estimate the damage functions. And then the climate projections are used to take those estimated damage functions, allow the damage functions to change based on projected increases in income and projected changes in climate, that is adaptation. And then we use the future climate realizations to develop estimates of what the impacts of climate change would be. So, sorry, your last question was spot on too. Oh yeah. Some places, I don't think it's a secret. Some places are going to benefit from climate change. So negative numbers are the places or the sectors sectors times places where people are going to benefit. So like climate change is going to be great for mortality in Norway. They don't have people die from high temperatures there. They have people die from cold winters. And to the extent that you're going to reduce those cold winters, that's going to be beneficial for them. I live in Chicago. I think, if I remember correctly, the reduction in cold winters, the reduction in mortality from warming winters is almost perfectly counterbalanced by the increase in mortality from hotter summers. And so it kind of depends what your starting point is.
Thanks. A couple more.
And I should say, I want to come back to this. If everyone lived in Siberia right now on the planet, climate change would be a plus.
No basketball teams.
No
Go ahead.
basketball teams.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. My name is Marina Zucker-Marcus. I work at GDP Center. Your model comes from the understanding that people are aware of climate change and they are maybe it's self-interested for them to fix it. How do we deal with a situation where many people in developed countries, they actually are denying this is a problem? So does it change the willingness of people actually going forward with this proposal? And second, is there an overlap between the countries that could be paying more for in the proposal paying net payment? But also, benefiting from the climate change. So if that, I'm thinking about Canada, or as you say, Norway, if there is, acknowledgement that is benefits, will they be willing to engage in this proposal? Thank you.
Yeah, these are great questions. I'm going to acknowledge that I'm wandering, you're pushing me to wander into politics. And I don't think I was invited here for my expertise on politics. But I think that's something I want all of us to wrestle with, is can the rich countries be capable of really engaging in costly actions if, I don't know if they'll necessarily benefit, but if the costs of climate change are going to be relatively low, as I have measured. Now, if you think there's going to be wide-scale climate-induced migration that's going to come to, like, I think we now have a pretty good understanding that countries have a very hard time with large-scale migration, or you think that supply chains are going to get messed up, or you think there's going to be some kind of macro effects, then that's a way that's outside of my estimates, and that could be a way for it to appear to be in people's self-interest. What causes people to deny climate change? That was your other question. I don't have a good answer to that. What I will note, though, since we live in the United States, is I do think there is a certain amount of American exceptionalism around that issue. And I think we probably overweight that, you know, Americans are 330 million people out of 8 billion. Most other countries do not have such a hard time with that. And in fact, I think every other G7 country has carbon pricing of some form or another. And I do think American exceptionalism on climate we shouldn't think that that's what the whole world is doing.
Great, let me sneak one in. I've got, oh, sorry. Yep, let me sneak one in from let me see if I can combine the two of these. Well, there's a couple from online. Thanks for engaging with us out there in the Zoomosphere. One of them is, have you engaged with any of the LMICs, and what kind of, if you have, what kind of reaction do you get from folks in developing countries from this? And then someone else asked a similar question: is what are the next steps? This is somewhat of a theoretical bargain based on some calculations, but what role can the proposal play in advancing climate action? What's your plan to do with this? That's from someone by Claire Harrison. I'll get to these two after.
So, yes, or is this the 9 people talking to each other? That was the question. No, this is a proposal that will be put forward in the Brazil COP, and that we've been working hard on. I don't think any of us pretend that it's about to be implemented by all 190 nations on the planet. And it's very much, and we're writing a book that is kind of an expanded, the 3-hour version of this, the extended play version. That goes into a lot of the subtleties in more detail. It's what I think it's one important role for academics, which is none of us have line item responsibility for being the climate king on the planet or climate queen on the planet. And I think what we can contribute is there's a freedom from that and thinking about the world in a different way. And it's a bit of a radical shift relative to the way that the international climate negotiations have gone on before. And this is really meant to have kind of a hard-nosed quid pro quo trade at the center. Not guilt money for what we did or reparations or anything like that, but like an acknowledgement that, yep, we are doing this to you guys now. And we're not inclined to just give you money for it. We're going to want something in exchange. And in exchange is carbon pricing and emissions reduction. Do I think that the climate negotiators, same set of climate negotiators have been going to same COPs for the last 15 or 20 years about to be like, oh my goodness, thank you, we hadn't thought of that. No, I don't think that. But I do think it's going to expand their thinking. And I will say, I've tried it out with several of them, unnamed, at high-income and low-income countries. And they're so ingrained in their way of thinking about the way climate negotiations have gone that I'm not getting them to agree, but getting them to understand the contours of this idea and that it's a trade and how it works takes surprisingly long. And it's not because these aren't smart people, it's because it's just a different way of thinking about the problem.
We'll take one here.
Hello, I am
Sorry.
I'm Duribes Rosario, and I am a mechanical engineering graduate student interested in working for renewables and sustainability in the future. Now, I appreciated where in slide 51 you talked about how the distribution
You
of
were
funds.
still awake?
Yes, it was. Also, I think they were made in LaTeX. That was nice. Now, in slide 51, you were talking about how the distribution of funds will not go to the countries, but directly to the people.
Yeah.
I highly appreciate that. And I was curious as to how that would be implemented in terms of being given to the people who most need it, and in particular, what I mean by that is people in extreme rural areas where there might not be the technology or access to distribute the funds. And what's the pathway to that?
Okay, so at its core is to drop the game of figuring out who's the most harmed and say everybody's harmed because it's a global pollutant. And some people are harmed because it's going to affect their mortality, risks, odds. Some people are harmed because they're going to have to spend a lot of money to engage in adaptation. And so we very much have it as a per head approach, not as rank ordering people based on some measure of worthiness. The second question is, does everyone really have mobile money? I think that was your question. Esther and Abhijit are much more expert on this than I am. It's one of the great features of our partnership. They know things, they know many things I don't know. Hopefully I know some things they don't know. And I think they have been surprised at the rate at which mobile money has taken off in different parts of the world. And I think if you thought, will this be exactly right, everyone will be able to access the money in year one, probably that's not fair. But we envision this like it's an annual payment, and that there would be some bumps and bruises along the way, but that those could be worked out.
I got a note here that we have room for one more question. I saw two of them up there. I think you got a chance to go out with the speaker, so we'll let the gentleman back there.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My name is Renato De Gaspi. I'm a researcher at the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab at Johns Hopkins University, and so I really enjoyed this part of grand bargain. I'm a political scientist, so anything that is bringing people kind of together that are not talking to each other is a good thing, I would say. But since you're going to the COP and you're probably going to engage with the Brazilian government, one of the things that my file's on Brazil. So one of the things that make Brazilians a bit anxious about this whole debate is who, in the mitigation technologies that are appearing, green steel, green technologies, who is going to capture the value here? Are you going to still be the resource, like sending natural resources to China to make the things, or are we going to capture a bit of the value? And I know that countries can do whatever they want with the money, but I think that one thing that Brazilian policymakers would look and say, well, that's a bit much, is 70% on, like for the families, how can we actually finance like mitigation and adaptation things if we choose to do it? How can we plan for mitigation, right? So have you thought about also playing with the percentages there, and if you thought about like technology development in the global south as well in this scenario or not?
So I think we basically intentionally decided not to do that, and really focus it on that these are not payments for mitigation, they're not payments for adaptation, they're compensation for the damages being caused by the developed country, the OECD countries. If Brazil, or fill in your favorite LMIC, wants to do something to achieve one of those other goals, that's terrific and they should do it. But I think part of what's made the COP negotiations so difficult is loading goal after goal after goal after goal on top of it. And I think, to my eye, part of the appeal of this is the clarity that undergirds the grand bargain. We are doing this to you, the OECD is doing this to the non-OECD, in a moral sense, in a polluter pays sense. We owe you this money. But we don't really want to just give money away, so we're going to require that you institute carbon pricing and not get into other goals. Thanks. For better or worse.
Thanks.
But I think once you start putting in multiple goals, then it's like you need the triple bank shot in pool, and like this is proven hard enough to just hit the straightaway shot.
Well, Professor Greenstone said that he could give a talk for 3 hours. I think we could sit here and talk with him for another 3 hours, but we've got to cut it off. But we can have a more informal conversation. We can have a reception in the back here. So I really want to thank Professor Greenstone for coming here and sharing his proposal, and look forward, I guess, in book and a number of other forms. And yes, we promise for the gentleman from the physics department, you can watch this again and share it with your friends, and we'll be sharing it on social media. And so yet another great Streeten lecture, really exhibiting a high-level economist who's not only talking with his 9 pals, but out there trying to talk to the whole world. And that's something that we see as a real important thing for economists and social scientists to be doing, especially in this complex world and especially on issues of such global importance like this. So please help me in giving a round of applause to Professor Greenstone, and let's take the conversation out here.